While working on other gaming-related projects for the channel, I've decided to take the time to do another video about illustration. This one, though, is less about specific techniques, and more about reassurances that just because your art doesn't fit what you expect from someone with your experience, doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. An often prevalent idea for a lot of artist communities, and in particular with younger or less experienced artists, is that once you've become a good artist, your early steps while creating an illustration should have a clear enough vision that they basically kinda look like the refined illustration you'll get later. Just, sketchier. Not necessarily in the sense that they'll have all the detail and the cleanliness of the final illustration. Rather, that your sketching stages are all anatomically, proportionally, perspective, and aesthetically correct, basically from the outset. That you may start with really rough lines that make up a bunch of very basic shapes, but they clearly showcase the final idea in a way that feels extremely intentional and accurate. There's also this assumption that you have to find a method for sketching things out that works for you and stick to it. This is all false. There are indeed some artists, usually those with professional training or education, that are this precise, and eventually artists become increasingly likely to reach this point, where they have this amount of precision, particularly if they're working on animation or storyboarding or something else, where they're drawing the same exact things very regularly. But reaching this point is not necessary to call yourself an experienced, quality artist, nor to create great final pieces. I myself struggled a bit with the idea that if the earlier phases of a work were really messy and looked awful, I'd somehow cheated my way to a nice finished piece by the end. It felt like I lacked some sort of understanding and was just guessing my way through a piece until I found something that happened to work, even if I wasn't using reference. It felt like an accident. And that can, on occasion, be true for bits and pieces of an illustration. But the more I started paying attention to my thought process while working through these ugly sketches, the more I realized that I did have an understanding of what I was trying to do, at least to some extent. I was just reaching it through less direct means, usually because I wasn't thinking about that specific problem at the time. Instead, I was busy fixing something else that wasn't working, which would then highlight another problem to fix, and on until the whole image had been ironed out. For artists like myself, I usually sketch so loosely sometimes, or have so little idea of what I actually want to do, that drawings start out looking horrifically grotesque. My process, though you wouldn't know it by looking at my previous videos, usually consists of overlaying layer after layer of sketch after sketch, each with more precision. I called it ironing out problems before, and that's literally what it's like, finding a wrinkle and smoothing it out. You'll also notice that I often tend to jump around to different parts of an illustration when doing this. I'll fix a problem with a shoulder, which then allows me to more clearly see that the nose is off center, and fixing that makes the hair look a little too poofy, or since I haven't looked at the chest in a while, when I look back I realize the angle of the chest is slightly wrong, thanks to having a bit of a fresh perspective on it because I haven't looked at it in a while, things like that. I'll start off sketching by not thinking about anything but a very basic idea, and then with each new sketch layer, I'll fix the couple most major problems with the previous sketch, refining and refining until it finally comes together. And I don't always use the same format for early sketch work along the way either. Sometimes I'll do like in this illustration, where I'll outline different shapes in the body with the lines emphasizing three-dimensionality. Other times, much more often in fact, I'll instead focus on silhouette or gesture and then build out from there. Sometimes I'll start out with a specific part of the body because that feels like the centerpiece of the pose, usually the shoulders or hips. Sometimes I'll use basic shapes for everything, sometimes only for parts, sometimes not at all. Sometimes I'll mix and match all of these techniques, which you can see I did for this drawing, only outlining the shapes for the torso but not the legs. Not only does this make me proficient in multiple sketching disciplines in case I need one or another for a specific illustration, but it also allows me to marry certain techniques to certain goals, instead of trying to force one technique that's less effective in relation to my workflow to do a job I'm not good at using it for. Because this is also worth noting, Unlike most tools for working on a car or something, a lot of tools in illustration can be co-opted to work for different purposes. A wrench is always a wrench and usually makes a terrible hammer, but sometimes a certain sketch refinement technique can be used in other places than what formal education intends it to be used for. When I say that some of my early sketches can be ugly, by the way, I genuinely mean it. They aren't pleasant, sometimes making very little sense, and would not look out of place when stacked up alongside the sketches of artists who have only been practicing for a couple of days. No joke. In my experience, skimping on the sketching phase, or abandoning an idea because the sketch doesn't immediately look like it's headed somewhere good, is one of the most popular bad habits less experienced artists pick up. It's pretty common for artists to want to rush to greatness, as if the idea will slip away and they'll mysteriously lose all artistic ability if the work doesn't spill itself onto the page before they can even blink. But your sketches are the most important part of your drawing. In reality, they're what usually allows your work to look its best, because that's the phase where you're free to experiment in whatever way you want, without losing tons and tons of work in the process. If you're already on shading a colored image, and you realize that an elbow is too long or something, that's a lot of work to fix. But if you're still sketching, it can take as little as 15 seconds to change. The power of sketching properly cannot be understated, but at the same time, the reason for that isn't because sketches need to be some sort of litmus test for your growing skill. Rather, it's because sketches are the lowest cost, highest return time to play with your drawing, and figure out what needs to change for a better final drawing. We're all perpetually learning, and ugly sketches are a chance to reinforce and build up skills over time. Don't think of them as a deficiency, but instead a way to keep your skills sharp. I'm someone who takes an incredibly long time to finish drawings. Always have. So instead of trying to rush myself to the finish, which didn't really work anyway, I started to ask how I could use that time more productively. If my drawing is going to take me forever anyway, I might as well put that time to the best use I can. And the best place I found to put it was into the sketching phase, because it maximized the amount of iteration I could do while minimizing the time each iteration took. If you're really looking into improving your sketching ability with broader, more applicable ideas instead of specific techniques, I'd say learn as many ways as you can to sketch. As I said earlier, I've become far more comfortable with sketching as I've gained a greater toolset of sketching options to default to. Don't think of the sketch as an obligatory means to an end. Treat it like the very center of your drawing. Doubly so if, like me, you're not planning to do super complex coloring and painterly shading or CGing. Give it the weight it deserves. But also, by the same token, don't be afraid to be okay with said sketches being terrifyingly awful at points. Take it step by step, find a problem area, and try to solve that one problem. Do this one problem at a time, and take the necessary time you feel you need before moving on. If you do that, I'm willing to bet your learning process will drastically quicken, while your final products will be more commonly polished. But what do you guys think? What's something about sketching I didn't say here that you feel can help others along the way? What sketching techniques do you usually use? And what's a hard lesson related to sketching that you've had to learn along the way? Sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.